Y después lo dejé y me fui como 3 semanas.
She cannot speak.
Oh.
It's okay. Okay, don't worry. Next to Valentina, I Oh. Time to, you need to catch up because we are very close to the front.
Okay, so let's take the opportunity
Yes,
to clarify.
At the beginning of the paper, right, the author discusses certain ideas about language. He doesn't use the word ideas, but he says conceptualization. You know, what ideas about language are challenges? Okay, there is a hand up there, and then we will go back to you.
Okay, I think one of the ideas that Uvalde criticizes is this traditional conception of languages as linguistic objects, like well-defined objects.
Exactly. And what language ideology
Monoglossic.
is this idea part of?
Monoglossic ideology.
And you study, right, when you read the paper by Fuller and Lehman, that this idea about language is pretty inaccurate, right? Languages are not well-defined linguistic objects. They are subject to, the design scrutiny just without taking into account other social factors. And other languages too. That's right. And okay. That's the idea he proposes. That's right.
What's that?
Cultural artifacts.
What are cultural languages?
That means that they are the consequence of the interplay of different contexts that give rise to language.
Languages are cultural artifacts. Okay, do you understand what artifacts are?
Yes, a consequence.
An object that is produced by a given cultural group or cultural agent.
And what's the role of value in relation to language?
Azul, speak up.
You need to project your voice, otherwise, it's Monday morning, people are sleeping, you see?
What I understood,
Speak to this guy, not to me.
Okay,
Tell
what I
them.
understood is that the purpose of RAE is to catalog the way in which members of the community use language, and then give it back to them as a norm.
Okay.
That's what I understood.
Okay. Let's see reactions.
Well, I think that RAI acts as a sort of, I would say, well, yes, Stefan acts as a sort of authority, and in that way it is considered that the paper proposes a sort of, I wouldn't say proposes, but shows that it challenges these authorities, shows the different challenges that have been made against the RAI. So,
RAI's authority. The
yes,
overlap.
yeah, all right, yes, that's it.
And Thomas?
Okay,
Now, a question. Are there, in addition to RAI, are there other institutions that can exert their authority over language in the Spanish-speaking world?
Excuse me, it's
No,
impossible to
he
do.
says he cannot think of any right now. And I'm sure somebody
Teachers
can.
and translators, which authorities you consult when in doubt about, how to translate?
Sondeo.
Fundeo, okay. Any other?
There are others.
Hispanic.
Here, like against Spanish.
Okay,
Body company,
okay, but what is that?
it's to consult doubts.
What kind of thing? It's not the same as.
No, it's like a hierarchy.
What kind of object? A dictionary. A dictionary. Okay, a dictionary that was produced by RAI. So we have.
Other institutions. Instituto Cervantes. Instituto Cervantes. Excellent. Any other institution? Think about institutions that have a say on the use of Spanish. In addition to RAI, in addition to Instituto Cervantes, Fundeo. Okay. Media outlets, and they have an influence on the use of Spanish. Can they? Oh, okay. Any other institution? Right. Schools, universities. Okay. So there are many linguistic authorities or many institutions that can have the function of being authorities. There is something that is peculiar about RAI. What is it? That is part of the answer that was provided by Azul. So there's something more to what RAI does as a language authority, more than just simply publishing dictionaries. What?
Language
Speak up. Speak up.
I know what
Speak up.
controlling.
No, más fuerte, conmigo. Esta pobre mujer está agarrándose la oreja, pues no puede escuchar. Come on.
I understand that RAE has the authority to come over Spanish and also in Spain and also across what used to be the colonies. So, and control language, also it controls language.
in those countries and also in Spain.
What do you mean by RAE controls language? Try to be more specific. Let's see.
Like
If you
it,
can, we can get help from the rest of the class.
okay.
But let's hear your answer first.
Like it says what is correct and what is not correct. Now, I mean, there was a time that it was the only authority, but now,
I don't know, it's like it has been sube,
Has been?
como que es más suave la que con que tiene.
Ah. Es más suave el control que tiene sobre la lengua.
Well, not
Subtle.
subtle. It isn't a monopoly anymore. That's what I mean.
Or
At first, it had the monopoly over the standardization of the language.
okay.
Spanish. It doesn't impose Spanish, but it rather controls and regulates Spanish around the different bodies that regulate Spanish, inside. When you say it doesn't impose Spanish, has the what that authority to impose the language in a particular place? In the colonial period, they did.
Oh, but that was not right.
Or the Spanish
In I.
queen and the right was means.
No. RAE was founded in the 18th century. So when RAE was founded, actually, the colonies were considering, or were just 50 years away from starting their independentization processes. So actually Spanish was imposed in America by the sword of the conquistadors and the Catholic missionaries, by the crown, let's say. But I'm interested in coming back to Carla's ideas about RAE controlling what is correct and what is not correct Spanish. That is to say, defining what counts as Spanish and what doesn't count as Spanish, right? But Del Valle also talks about defining another aspect of Spanish, not just the formal, and by formal I mean grammatical, dimension of the language. There is something else that is less concrete about Spanish that RAE aims at controlling too. Any idea what we're talking about? If you don't have any idea, no worries. We move forward and then we come back.
Sort of its political and cultural standing.
Exactly.
So this idea that all of the peoples in the world that speak Spanish are sort of brotherly cultures,
Exactly.
and they're all like children of the Spanish Empire.
Exactly. So if Spanish as a language points to this idea that all speakers are like a family, if Spanish as a language points to unity, if Spanish as a language points to a common tradition and origin, what's the function of Spanish in that sense? If it points to all these meanings, it points to the idea of unification. What's the function of?
Nation building.
Well, it's not a nation, but okay, if it contributes to a given identity, because it points to a certain identity, the Pan-Hispanic identity. What's the function of Spanish?
To preserve that identity through the cultivation of Spanish.
Okay, but listen to my question. If Spanish points to all these meanings you've mentioned, what is its function?
It aims at homogenizing the Spanish-speaking identity.
Okay, but that is not the function.
No, it aims at control.
No, that's a different function. Okay, that is more related to the first idea that Cornejo brought up. If Spanish is a signifier that points to a given signified, I know you. What is its function? In that direction. What other similar concepts? Index or
It has like a symbolic function.
Exactly. So Spanish is a symbol of unity of all Pan-Hispanic brothers and sisters. Okay? And RAE, according to the base, doesn't just aim at controlling the formal, grammatical definition of what Spanish is. It also aims at controlling its symbolic value. That's why RAE is so interested in talking about Spanish as a symbol of unity among all Spanish speakers across the world. It is interested in constructing Spanish as a symbol of unity, as a symbol of a common root and a common tradition.
When you reread the paper, so think about that. I kept thinking of what you said. This idea that RAE captures language that is used by the people and codifies it, and then it gives it back. According to the project, that is what RAE claims. And he says, don't take it as face value. Right? There are other interests. And along that line, you think about the functions that have been discussed. Now, so of course, in a context, and we'll fast forward history, but we can talk a little bit about the context in which this language academy was founded. What do you know about the foundation of as a language authority for the Spanish language? Because of course it's not random. It's not it's not a matter of something that happened just out of the blue at a particular point in time, right? There was a context that was created for it. What do you see at that
Come on,
time?
share your ideas with us.
RAE was created in 1717. Oh. What other institutions were created by that time? Okay, other language academies, and of course, but in Spain, any other institutions?
Do you know who were the kings? Or at least the dynasty?
Shemesh.
Okay. Dynasty.
Sorry.
Right.
The war of Spanish succession have just ended, and the Bourbon dynasty rose. Yes, and Philip V was the first king of the Bourbon dynasty. And in that context, RAE was founded, and by Juan Manuel Fernández Pacheco, who was an admirer of, I don't know how to pronounce it, but something in French. Academia. Of course.
Academia de la Lengua Francesa.
Yeah. Academia.
Where are the French speakers? Has anybody taken up French as a second foreign language? No? Which languages did you choose, by the way? Oh. German. Okay, who else chose German? Are you classmates in German? No? Are you taking just the reading comprehension part or the general? Okay. Other languages? Italian? Portuguese? No French, okay. Okay, French. Any other language? Has anybody taken up a Quechua, for example? Or Hebrew? Dutch? Here at the School of Languages, Departamento Cultural. So what do you and what do you mean finish? 2 years. Interesting. Okay. Where were we?
Korea. I studied Korea.
Korea.
Levanta la mano.
I couldn't make it to the possible.
Okay. Let's go back to the Bourbons. The Basic tells you that the Bourbons took the initiative to found the RAE, and that was part of a larger project that aimed at exercising a sort of totalitarian power and control over the entire empire. So they founded RAE and some other important institutions that contributed to the same aim. Did you get curious and look up what were some of those institutions? No? Okay. One of those institutions was la Biblioteca Real. How can an institution like a library contribute to the shaping of a national identity?
By what materials they choose to include in that library and what materials they choose to exclude from there. So any linguistic varieties that are included in that library would be part of the national identity, any sort of mythology or history that is, I don't want to say enforced,
No, selected.
selected by the library to be the official telling of their history and their culture.
Excellent. Excellent. So it's not just a matter of the language per se, but the context, the history, and the figures that are chosen, the poets, the writers, the historians that are chosen, whose works are chosen and selected for this collection. Exactly, they contribute to shaping what Spain and what the empire at the time is.
Can we relate it to prestige planning? For study platform?
Probably, yes, you can. Okay, another important institution, la Academia Real de Bellas Artes. How can that contribute to shaping the identity of a nation? There's a particular aspect of the identity of a nation that can be influenced, shaped, molded by the.
They choose what to represent about reality, what part of reality, what part of the history to tell.
And shape an institution like that also shapes or molds the aesthetics that characterizes a given nation. In the Real Academia de las Bellas Artes, in addition to training sculptors, painters, etc., architects were trained too, and they were given the job of designing the urban landscape of Madrid at the time.
These parts. A part of history it shows things that characterize a given.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, but that comes from colonial times, the 1600s. This is the mid-1700s, so it's later. But definitely, when it comes to locating the buildings of important institutions, that location is not random, but planned. So, when you take a look at Google Maps and you look for Real Academia Española, you will find that it's right across Museo del Prado, which, by the way, was also established by the Bourbons in this period. And it's right next to La Iglesia de San Jerónimo. You know who San Jerónimo is, how important his work is for your profession. And it's right next to a very large park, Parque del Retiro, in Madrid. It's probably the largest park in the city, and it's right next to a very important street. I don't know if you call it a street. Paseo del Prado. That's a very beautiful and majestic part of the city. But all the buildings, if you take architecture and urban planning as a kind of text, then you can see how that quote-unquote text that consists of all these buildings that I've mentioned, they all reveal or speak about the power and control that the Bourbons exerted at that time. By the way, in Moodle you can see photographs of what I'm describing. Alexia, notice another important institution. I mentioned in Museo del Prado, Real Academia de la Historia, not Real Academia de Historia.
That was right there.
Okay. So you see, another institution that defines what counts as the official narrative of a nation. And there must be another one. At least another one. Okay.
Is your Real Academia
Of science, probably, but I don't know when exactly it was created. But of course, the Bormans were very interested in promoting the diffusion or the publication of all the findings that the explorers had made up to that point. It was more a matter of letting the world know what the Spaniards had discovered in the new territory.
Why are all
Real means from the royalty or by the royalty. Yeah, of course. Like Real Madrid Fútbol Club. Y todos los clubes de fútbol son a Real algo. It's not about reality, it's about royalty.
So, at that time, let's say 17th century, that didn't have any problem legitimating its authority. It had total support from the royalty. So at that time, the legitimacy of such institution was not challenged. But what happened in the 19th century? And what was the context like in the former colonies of Spain? How did it? I think can you project your voice because I know it's like it's a big platform.
That they became independent and started to reject the authority of the crown and to modify the language and how they speak and use text.
Do you think that was a deliberate attempt, like in the college, okay, let's modify our language, let's don't speak like, people in Spain, let's, do you think that was a deliberate? Probably. Notice what happens. One force, let's say, that fosters diversity and inclusivity has to do with, being, separate from one another. So if you think about, people that came from Spain and didn't go back to Spain, and they were influenced by speakers of other varieties of Spanish, but also other languages, what is natural to happen is that changes without at least not any deliberate attempt, not any top-down language policy. That was a natural thing to happen, right? Consider migration. This is what happened. Yeah.
No, I said not natural, but sociolinguistic.
Exactly. Not natural, but without, intervention that is strategic. Exactly. That is planned. Exactly. The social life nothing is natural. That's right. But the point is that that is a linguistic classical language, right? People when they migrate, and they start communicating with people of other languages and other language varieties, their languages change. Okay, but then, as you said, what happened? The colonies started to get organized, right? And alongside the creation of the new nation states, there are other institutions that were created, such as universities. That's right, universities. So education institutions, judicial institutions, governmental institutions.
Newspaper.
Publishing houses.
You take newspapers for granted, but in the 18th and 19th century, newspapers started to be founded,
and they were important institutions. Now, you take reading the news or reading about events in your community and in the world for granted because they're just on the phone. You just take your phone out of your pocket and there it is. But back in the day, it was quite a network, not just to gather information, but also to type it, print it, and distribute it. And newspapers had a great impact in the exercise of whatever rights people had at the time, and in the construction of public opinion, and in the and in exercising some sort of pressure on representatives to do something. That is, it was the way of being informed in order to push for changes.
So, what do you think that happened once that the new nation states started to build their own institutions in relation, and of course they started to reject, interventions from Spain, not only in the political domain, but also in the scientific and cultural domains. So, what was the natural thing to do in such a context? Having highly educated people, right? To challenge, right? To challenge the language authority of language, right? And the ground, the historical context was, a fertile ground for that to happen. And of course, at that time, we see the emergence of national language academies in the former colonies, right? And they started to, publish, manuals, dictionaries with uses of Spanish that, were different from, the ones that were published and codified by Iran. Of course, the challenge to the legitimacy of this very important language authority, not just, when we talk about the importance of the language authority, not just for the sake of language itself, but for the sake of other interests that go beyond language. Of course, they need to, react to these challenges and to legitimate their power once again, of course, in a very different context, in which, of course, the swords and any other tactics were no longer available. So, what strategy did Guy implement to legitimate its authority in the 19th century context?
Legitimize?
Legitimate.
Nice.
What was that? But you study in this course that language authorities have the role of designing what kind of instruments? That's the decision, right? Any idea?
The idea of anti-Semitism,
What is that?
to counteract their resistance, they proposed this idea of portraying Spanish as what we talked about at the beginning of the class, Spanish as a unifying force, and to unify all Spanish speakers under a single community and avoid these resistance to create different dictionaries, vocabularies, rejecting what I proposed.
Okay, so you two refer to a deliberate plan to tackle these challenges. How do you call that? Language policy, right? Language policy. And of course, in the context of the 19th century, we find the term Hispanic language policy. And of course, this language policy includes different strategies, many actions, right, that are interrelated to one another, right? You mentioned, okay, one strategy that includes, let's say, consulting, that is to say, not taking unilateral decisions regarding language structure and use, but consulting local language analysts. Okay. For the sake of modernization, that is to say, it is obvious that an authority that is perceived as, a post-colonial power will be rejected. However, such an institution, when presented as an institution that wants to, establish agreements with other language academies on the basis of an equal standing, well, that may trigger, different reactions. So, in that sense, there is an attempt to portray like not just as an old-fashioned, aristocratic, colonial language authority, but as a modern, democratic, scientific institution working for the benefits of speakers all over the Hispanic or Spanish-speaking world. So there is an attempt, right, to remain in power through different means. Any other strategy that is included in this language policy? But as you see, some of you bought it and said this is what RAI does, but this is what it claims to do at a particular point in time. To discourage potential claims and attacks. Any other strategies?
Strategies
For the consolidation or legitimation of the authority of RAI in the 19th century and onwards. Did you read the creation of the new grammar dictionary? Okay. We find exactly the publication of new codes that include, what do they include? That is, different from, it includes all the accepting diversity, accepting variation. That is new. But think about it. Is it actually the case that by doing this, there's to say, by incorporating uses of certain expressions that are, very frequently used in certain regions and, used by certain groups of speakers, that's why it actually includes variation.
Wasn't that in Latin America?
Yeah. But are all the uses codified in these new codes? No, so still notice that still the job of RAI remains the same. There's a selecting.
And it is presenting the Spanish varieties, first option, and it's for example, Chile,
So there is a hierarchy that even though it is hidden, it's still reproduced. And you can perceive that in
one in Buenos Aires.
Right. So we have the standards that is, it's constructing on the basis of a particular language variety that is taken as a model, not any. That's right. And we still see that, right, keeps, let's say, the right to select, the members of the language academies in the Spanish-speaking countries in the Latin American colony. So the idea is to read between the lines when you look at these strategies. Even if you find something that is positive and inevitable, accepting language variation as a linguistic fact, you still see that the activity of life consists of selecting among this diversity certain linguistic features to be incorporated and others that are not. That is part of the
So the varieties in America are in the first position and are put in secondary position to the Spanish of Spain.
Can you speak up?
As if Spain speaks just one Spanish, there are a variety also within Spain. The aim is to establish the standard in social position.
even if they don't say it explicitly, right? Even, and this is something that when you analyze the strategies and you look what is, beyond them, you don't take them as face value. You look at what is, you see that there is this reproduction of a hierarchy with, the Spanish language authorities at the center, and then, the local language authorities at the very right. And we had in Córdoba, right, a very important event not long ago.
2019.
Were you here? Did you?
Connect over the numbers.
Yes, I also.
You attended?
I have to work.
Oh, you have to work?
Yes.
For free?
No. I remember something. No, but I was the board recently from Spain.
Which venue were you? Yeah. Okay. So, by the way, in Moodle you also find Dr. Carranza's you find her the paper that she read at CIVI. She was one of the invited speakers. Unlike other conferences, in which you can register voluntarily to participate, and then there is a committee that says, okay, your idea is original, promising, etc. You can be a speaker, a presenter, whatever. The CILE invites the speakers. And Dr. Carranza was one of the invited speakers. You get her paper in case you want to read. She talked about technology and education. And
Guess who was not invited?
would you say Jose was invited by CILE?
He was not invited.
However, you tell the story. You
He
like
was not
that.
invited. However, he was invited by Facultad de Filosofía to deliver at the same time, and then they organized the counter event.
The resistance.
Es como más, incluso es más, no tiene como el cuerpo, no es de 60, 60, 90, 60, 90, 90.
Yo voy a traer una amiga de viaje.
To get the flavor of what do these events that are promoted by the academy look like. And how they, we study, how semiotic resources the king entering the fence,
It's my
and people standing up. You can interpret those actions.
que son las propiedades.
Okay, and of course it symbolizes power.
Entonces,
These people are validating.
lo vimos, pero
I wonder what the interests of the king would be to come all the way from Spain to Córdoba just to attend one of these events. There must be something at stake that is not just Spanish language. Maybe other interests.
And other authorities reinforcing those ideas. I remember at the time, also the president gave a speech connecting both our countries are historically connected. That should remain that way.
y ahí la primera.
Yes, they say
No, tira la primera también de ahí.
the government celebrated like
A mí también me tiene por
1992 was the beginning of civilization.
Exactly.
And celebrating
A mí
Spain.
también me tiene, son de
Right.
tan rápido.
Just
Después
yes,
de ver el toque bueno.
Exactly. And the vice president also posted on X that it was an important day to celebrate the union. And let's take a look at it. Because what she says rings a bell. It sounds pretty consistent with some of the ideas that the Basic criticized.
Aquí es una tela de tinta.
Tiene hueco, mira. Aire. Ñoña.
Yo veo que no notas hace rato la ropa. Disculpame que tenía. Ya te quedaste sin, ¿no?
Y si se compra un cuaderno, recién termina el de primer año, el año pasado se termina. Imagínate le puse el cuaderno.
Fui por el cuarto cuaderno.
Mira todas las hojas que me quedan ahí. Ah, no, espera.
No. Viene para 5 garras.
This is Victoria Villarreal, the Vice President. En este día quiero rendir homenaje a nuestra raíz hispana, que nos une con millones de hombres y mujeres a lo largo de Iberoamérica. So it's one unit, one geopolitical unit that she's talking about.
Somos hermanos.
And notice that she uses the verb une, she uses the metaphor of the common root. Compartimos un idioma, una fe y una cultura que moldearon nuestra identidad y nos recuerdan que pertenecemos a una misma historia. Unity. Sharing, and this is interesting, sharing an essential or a set of essential characteristics that define an identity. That is called an essentialist view of an identity. That is, there is an attribute that defines who you are. Okay? That is, essentialism is discussed, by the way, in Fuller and Lehman's paper about identities and in the paper about language ideologies. Y ahora perdí el poco. La hispanidad es la herencia común, again, sharing, que nos dio tradiciones, valores y el orgullo de saber que somos parte de una gran comunidad. This is exactly the same thing Del Valle is questioning. And that's it, okay.
Of course, this points to the efficiency of this language policy.
Exactly.
It seems that it's been very, very efficient in promoting the institution's interests. And,
No, this is an example, guys, of how an ideology gets reproduced. Whether strategically or not. But these ideas of a shared, of a common heritage one united community across the two continents. Those ideas have been repeated so often, recurrently, and they've circulated through different media, and they've been uttered by so many different figures that they have become invisible. People just take those ideas as common sense, the way things are. In other words, those ideas have become naturalized. And you see, sometimes maybe people with good intentions just repeat them. I'm not saying that this is the case. Probably this is pretty strategic. And this is probably written in response to an alternative view that promotes a different narrative. The narrative of the conquistadors exploiting and desecrating an entire continent. Okay? So you could interpret this as pretty strategic. But sometimes other people with no intention of questioning alternative views, they simply reproduce the same idea. We're one and the same with Spain. I don't think so. But these ideas have become naturalized.
And these ideas regarding homogeneity, which from social linguistics have been challenged for many, many decades by them, are still reproduced. These ideas that this is the same language, and even the term that is called añotoda, is like, this is what we speak, which is just, one well-defined, clear-cut entity that is shared by all Spanish speakers. It's absurd. So when you read the paper, pay attention to those ideas that are proposed by RAE and how these ideas are challenged by José Belle, which of course works within a different, ideological perspective. Questions about this paper?
A question to this one. What's your name? Melina Vizafani. Are you in the translation track or in the teaching track?
Translation.
Okay. As a future translator. Do you work as a translator currently? No, not yet. Okay, my question is a future translator then. Do you see any value in having an academy like RAE is in the Spanish-speaking world? Do you think it's useful for something, or it's useless? What's your opinion? That's the most interesting part. What about this?
Yes, sorry. My name is Agustina Nuneri.
Nunari.
I believe that RAE is not important because the speakers are the ones who make up the language, and maybe RAE could be like a second option or an institution that makes norms if they want to make them, but I believe that speakers should be the one that create the language and have this first opinion that matters. Maybe eventually we'll become like a mess, but I believe in that.
Okay.
I don't like RAE.
You don't like it? Okay, I can tell. What about you?
I do believe it's useful to have an institution such as RAE, because even though I do agree with Agustina regarding that it's speakers who make the language and not the other way around, but I do believe that it's important to have an institution that in certain form, standardizes the language
Right.
for us to speak the same and all of us to understand each other.
And as a future translator, how do you see that as a value for your work?
Well, I do consult RAE now, and I think that I will consult RAE in the future when I work as a translator for this reason that I
What's your field?
don't know.
You don't have any?
No.
And you, Tina?
I like, is it legal translation?
Legal
Traducción
translation.
jurídica.
Uh-huh.
And I believe RAE has like a legal dictionary as well
Right.
that I do consult. I have to consult because the institution already exists and
Right.
controls the language. So
Right. So probably, despite your personal preference or dislike for RAE, your name is?
Lisel.
Lisette says maybe it is useful when it comes to standardized
yes, of course.
uses, standardized orthography, vocabulary.
Especially because as translators, we will be working with clients that probably are not from Argentina.
Exactly.
Maybe we will be working with people from Mexico or Colombia, and you need, in a way, to have a common a standard
Norm,
language,
yes.
or like
Exactly.
a variant,
Variety.
sorry, that
Okay.
you can communicate effectively with.
Exactly. Right. And there was another question I wanted to ask.
I noticed that in the paper they didn't mention anything about linguistic imperialism. Could we relate it to this paper, or am I getting
No, go ahead. Tell us how you relate.
I know, I think linguistic imperialism is more about imposing a language. Which happens, but I think even though they're not, or at least what they talk about in paper, it's not about imposing the language, but it's like imposing the norms and the symbolic power that comes from the language. So I'd like to hear related.
Right, and Philipson, who is the author that developed this whole idea of linguistic imperialism, also talks about how the spread of a global language, like he talks specifically about English, how the spread of English goes hand in hand with the spread of corporations of British or American origin. And for example, the spread of English has been instrumental in spreading cultural products like all the movies produced by Hollywood, all the music that is produced by Sony, CBS, etc. And the books that are aimed or that are used for teaching English as a second language, that are produced by Penguin, Pearson, what are all the other companies? Longman, etc., etc. So the spread of English is instrumental for the consolidation of businesses that are in the hands of American, British, or Australian companies. That is part of imperialism too, in his view. You could wonder what happens with Spanish too, because Spanish has also been instrumental in consolidating the business of some Spanish publishing houses. It's also contributed to the spread of the business of administering exams of Spanish proficiency. You don't have to take them because you're native speakers of Spanish. But these are exams like P, G, first certificate, what's the other? All those exams that are sold by British or American universities. They're also sold by Instituto Cervantes. Okay? Your school, many years ago, designed a program to administer exams that are similar to those, but they are locally designed. That's called the CELU. Certificado de Español. No, CILE de Congreso. CELU, certificado. Okay. Probably we can look it up. Huh? No, no es universal.
We used to,
Okay.
come and sit in the desk, like,
Yeah.
The names of the students were taking the exam and for identification. And because the important thing is not just the exam, but all the business that surrounds those exams. You know that there are books that are published to prepare students for those exams. There are courses that are offered for teachers who prepare students to take those exams. Then, there are experiences, like, studying abroad to get ready for those exams.
Certificado de Español Lengua y Uso.
So, foreigners used to take, or students of Spanish as a foreign language would take that exam many years ago here. And it was, it would have been interesting if those exams had been adopted by, for example, Brazilian universities. We're part of the same geopolitical unit, the Mercosur, and the idea of establishing Mercosur originally was for the neighboring countries to develop all sorts of policies that would favor one another. For example, it would have been interesting, it would have been good if we hired Brazilian teachers to teach Portuguese in our schools, to continue teaching more and more future teachers of Portuguese for our needs, right? And vice versa. But guess what happened? Brazil paid for the Spanish proficiency exam to be administered by the best bidder. El más barato era el Instituto Cervantes, not the School of Languages. So Brazil is paying Spain for those services that this school was in a very good position to administer. So, why do you think Instituto Cervantes won the battle? Not just because it was cheaper, but because it had what kind of value?
A symbolic value.
Exactly, more symbolic value, more prestige than the pobre Facultad de Lengua. So, you see, building, constructing or shaping the value of an entity like the Spanish language brings benefits, not just symbolic benefits, but cash benefits, okay? For which political unit? ¿El mundo panhispánico o España? Spain, or some Spanish company, not for a Colombian or Portuguese company or organization. So, in this paper, Del Valle tells you a part of the history. He cannot devote the whole a short paper to tell you everything that's going on with the spread of the Spanish language around the world. If you're interested in reading more work or other papers by him, you can find them in our library, there are other papers in which he talks about the commercial benefits that the spread of Spanish and the symbolic value of and the authority of RAE have brought about. Last year we used to have a London paper, right? In that paper he talks about other aspects of the spread of Spanish. But I'd like to just, before we take a break, consider very briefly the title of your paper. Notice the first noun phrase, linguistic histories. In the plural, again, we had world Englishes last week, and now we have histories. Why? Why histories? Why the plural?
Because it comprises different countries, the history of different countries.
Okay, that could be part of the answer. At least.
Spanish point of view,
Okay.
which is not all the thing, because we don't have the same point of view as Mexican.
Okay. Okay.
So similarly to Pennycook, he pushes against this idea of one historicity of chronological order of the development.
Exactly. Exactly. So there is a quote-unquote history of the language that has been traditionally told. In that, that is the sort of history of the language that you get in courses like Historia de la Lengua, Historia de la Lengua Española, Historia de la Lengua Inglesa, Historia de la Lengua Francesa, in which some historical landmarks in the history of a country are associated with different stages, different static stages in the development of the history of the language. So you get labels like Español clásico, Español medieval, Español moderno. So that is one solid, immutable variety of Spanish spoken at a particular historical period, and all the grammatical, lexical, and orthographic characteristics of that immutable variety are described, and they are associated with, I don't know, the reign of these kings, all these historical events, whatever. What the Raza here is telling us is there's another way of looking at the history or the histories of a language. And in this paper, he chooses one particular way of telling that story. And that is relating Spanish with a language authority and the resistances, or the resistance that there have been towards or against these language authorities. That's another way of seeing the development of the language. And here he's not interested in the lexical characteristics or the grammatical characteristics. He's interested in seeing the language as a symbol of this pan-Hispanic united community across two continents, or the symbol of a Mexican identity and how it clashes with the view promoted by RAE. So the question is, what RAE and other other organizations are fighting for is, what is Spanish a symbol of? Not just simply what grammatical variants are standard. That's part of the story, but another part is, what does Spanish stand for? Does it stand for a unified pan-Hispanic community? Does it stand for diversity? Is it one well-defined object? Okay, Azul, has this panorama made it clearer? Sure. Do you have any questions? Okay. No worries. Out and loud.
Maybe it's a lot question to everyone, but he mentions about the different influences that many academics have on languages when they are in contact, and the difference, for example, of the British academia or the authority, for example, of the French academia.
Academy.
What is academic stuff? What are those?
Academies?
Like similar to the past?
Yes. The English language doesn't have an academy. There's no British English Academy or anything like that. The people who study history of the language, where are you? Here. Okay. You know about, you can tell Azul why there isn't an academy of the English language.
Well, I guess that it has to do with the fact that the United States has developed a variant of the English language with different spellings. And for that reason, there is no a unified academy that would dictate the rules for the English language across the world.
Any other? Yeah.
Not the same political processes affected English that affected other European languages.
Yeah.
So this did not lead to the same, say, building of institutions for English.
Right.
There were very different political processes that affected English, and some happened at much earlier times than, let's say, Spanish, Italian, French, that were more or less in the same political ambience when many of these academies were set.
Exactly. There were attempts in Great Britain to establish academies, but what prevailed was the liberal ideas. So the establishment of the academy didn't prosper because, as she very well explained, the ideological, the political atmosphere was very different in Great Britain.
Some varieties of English were very much established by the time they tried to create English. So the refutal was too strong, let's say, for it to achieve the status legit.
However, there are
authorities, like the dictionaries.
Exactly.
We have to consult them when we have to translate.
Exactly.
Yeah, but for example, there is no communication dictionary in Spanish as it is in English, which would be really helpful.
Why don't you guys get together and propose a project of a very useful, let's say, graphical piece that would make you millionaire. And you'd make a very important contribution to the industry. Let's do that.
Dictionary but I can't find it anywhere. And if you want to compare definitions of like with other sources, you don't have many sources, which is, for example, in English, we use many dictionaries, Oxford, Cambridge, and we open them and we try to compare and contrast, which we can't do in Spanish.
When I was a student, there used to work with a dictionary, I don't know if you know it, co-build. Co-build. Build, like build, CO, preceding it. The beauty of that dictionary was its examples. Because instead of just giving you just 2 or 3 word isolated phrase as an example, it would give hundreds, I'm exaggerating, many different examples of its many different uses. So you could learn collocations from the examples, and each entry had like a measure of frequency of use of the different alternative collocations, if there were different collocations.
And for example,
So maybe you can find that on the web too.
that's the case. I mean, this dictionary isn't in the online. We use online dictionaries. We
Right.
don't use paper dictionaries as much as online dictionaries. And for example, if you open Google and find a word, there's a definition of right. That first, there's, I think there is hay como
That's Spain.
entre la RAE y Google hay como una sí, para que salga el resultado de la entonces porque eso también debe mover mucho o sea
a la noche mencioné un diccionario que no sé si ustedes conocen. Me lo recomiendo, no es porque cobre comisión. Pero cuando yo estudiaba y usábamos diccionarios de papel, y veníamos de la facultad con 2 bolsas con diccionarios, literalmente a la andina. Uno, que según me comentaron a la noche, no lo conocían, se llama Activator, Language Activator. Que si pueden conseguirlo, viene en papel, vieja escuela, pero es muy útil para aprender diferencias sutiles en el uso de palabras que pueden ser consideradas sinónimas y no lo son. Entonces, si vienen venían dos activators, uno era The Essential Activator, con muchos dibujitos, puede ser útil para quienes enseñan a niveles intermedios, y el Language Activator grande para estudiantes avanzados y futuros traductores puede ser útil si consiguen, no creo que se venda más nuevo.
My mom studied professorado de inglés, so I have that experience.
That's a
I
Jewish.
checked. I have the 2017 version of the German dictionary, and in between, let's say, letters, there's like 10 letters, and there's like a section of language, plus 2 or 3 like, mixed in the middle.
Yeah, it's a
Newer versions of the normal dictionary include the languages.
Right. It's a very unique piece in case you are interested. Very useful. Okay, guys. Having finished with the advertisement and the promotion of Mauna, let's take a break.
Ahora ponemos advertisement. El yo tengo que te seguir WhatsApp.
I couldn't grasp the idea of these competitive tensions behind the language because this Spanish language policy sometimes aims to erase these associative tensions. And the point is that I couldn't understand what the meaning of tension is. So,
Okay. Basically, conflict.
yeah, definitely.
So, what the base is saying is that writing a grammar, standardizing one variety involves making decisions that exclude the options that characterize alternative varieties of the same language. That is what standardizing consists in. So, by producing a grammar of Spanish, the official RAE grammar of Spanish, that process erases any possible source of conflict. In that sense, conflict between not just varieties, but the groups of speakers associated with each language variety.
So they are not taken into account when building the grammars.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And what RAE has found useful is to work on the basis of, allegedly on the basis of the consensus that each language, that each academy in each country expresses. So there is consensus about this version of the grammar. Everybody says, okay, we agree that is the standard variety of Spanish. In that way, conflict and tensions are made to disappear.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other question about this paper?
Can the concept of
Janela?
I was wondering if the concept of erasure introduced in the text or language and languages can be applied to the
Yes, definitely. It's the same concept. There is some ideological element that is meant to disappear by means of imposing or spreading a dominant ideology. In this case, the writer talks about an idea rather than an ideology. The idea that there has been consensus among the language academies to produce one standard grammar. Okay, any other question? No? Then, let's have a short period for questions about the preceding paper that we didn't have time to question last class. And Orneco has a question about the paper by Enco. So if you have any question about that paper,
On page
523. Last page? First column.
yeah. Perhaps it's time to question the very notions from that.
Okay, what line are you? Yeah. Fifth line from bottom up. fifth line from bottom up in the first column.
Justo lo que no subraya. Sí, sí, ya lo vi.
Okay, at the end, Penny mentioned this idea that languages, or the conception of languages as separate or well-defined entities. So my question is if this is what these four perspectives have this underlying ideology of monoglossic belief.
Okay, that's an interesting question for the rest of the class. Carla Cornejos asks, do the four theoretical perspectives discussed by critique, do you know the difference between critique and criticize?
Critique is the noun.
No, the verb to critique and the verb to criticize.
Critique is to question, and criticize is like technique.
To criticize means to express some criticism, some negative opinion about something. To critique means to evaluate, to assess. So to critique it is the cognitive operation and does not necessarily lead to expressing criticism. Okay? So the question by Cornejo is, do the four theoretical perspectives that Pennico critiques in this paper share the view that languages are well-defined, ¿habías usado otro adjetivo? ¿No? Yeah, well-defined entities, separate objective entities.
Because it seems to me that this belongs in the direction of homogeneity, but the four perspectives contain or embrace in a way diversity, so it's kind of a contradiction.
Okay. What are your reactions to Carla's question and then contribution? Right, but she is perceiving some sort of paradox in the sense that they are all of these perspectives seem to promote some sort of diversity, but at the same time, she has the impression that the four theoretical perspectives are based on a monoglossic ideology, in the sense that all of them consider languages to be well-defined, separate objects. So Spanish is one object, rather than being multiple different varieties in which what prevails is variation.
Well, for
So,
example, the global linguistic perspective, I know it's about how the English language has been affected, but it does take into account all varieties of English, right? So that would be, for example, with
like which ones? Which variety? But you're talking about the word English.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Tenía el otro, y el otro no había hecho nada. No podía averiguar esa respuesta. Solo, no, perdón.
Okay, that's a question.
De hecho, tengo, desde que tengo WhatsApp, todas las fotos que me han mandado.
Okay. Reactions to that? Reactions to Carlos? Daniel and Carlos.
Or also English is a lengua franca, because the English is a lengua franca perspective, because if I speak German and I use English to communicate with a Spanish speaker, the Spanish speaker uses English to speak with me, is that English? Or where, I mean, that could go against the idea of monoglottic.
Right. The point is, the English as a lingua franca perspective, according to Tenico, concentrates on the characteristics, the grammatical, the lexical, and phonological core characteristics of a code that enables this sort of intercultural communication between non-native speakers of English. And that, according to Tenico, is based on the belief that that is a well-defined common code that is shared by those non-native speakers. And from the perspective of world Englishes, according to Tenico, each one of these varieties, say Australian English, Canadian English, they are well-defined, separate varieties. Hence, the name. This is one variety which is different from this other variety. And the world English's perspective ignores the internal diversity in each one of these varieties, because when you talk about Australian English, which of all the Australian Englishes do you have in mind? Well, probably standard Sydney English, and I bet Sydney English is totally, well, not totally, but Sydney English is not exactly the same as Perth English, which is on the other side of the island. So she's right in saying the four different perspectives have the same conceptual disadvantage, so to put it. It's positive that they embrace diversity. The disadvantage in each case is that they still reproduce a monoglossic perspective of either a language or a language variety.
In that sense, we have to define what it is a variety, and to what extent it is different from the conception of a language and other languages.
Right.
I mean, this is just a personal view, but in practical terms, probably if I try to speak to a German guy in German, or at least try to do so, probably I won't understand most or 80% of what he says, and not the same with someone who may speak a different variety of English. So if we see it that way, we can say that just in terms of amount of shareness or things that we can understand each other, we can communicate. Maybe with some issues, real issues, but for me that would make, because it's abstract, it's just a conceptualization, say that the same language, maybe some variation.
Right. What Honeycook is actually questioning is this idea that languages are well-defined entities that are self-contained, meaning they have no quote-unquote contamination from other languages. They are pure, self-contained codes, pretty much like what Braille believes in, that the Spanish language should not be contaminated from or through the influence of the English language. In Moodle, you have a video of a campaign that was carried out by Braille some years ago that criticizes the use of English words in Spanish advertisements. So, just you need to take a look at it. It's in Moodle.
When we talk about ideology, we saw the one nation, one language ideology. So maybe this can be compared and in order to understand the language to write it on a text. It can be, no, in order to understand it, it can be that one nation, one variety, right? To like believe that the whole nation speaks only one variety,
Exactly.
which is not the case.
Exactly.
Because I'm from the north, she's from the south, so we speak totally different Spanish.
Exactly. Right. At some point, those abstractions are made, and even this guy that we're going to comment on, Yanis, he admits, I question the idea that languages are well-defined, self-contained objects. But I cannot help it, and I need to use the term language to talk about Greek and German, even if I question the fact that there is one unique thing, one unit that is well-defined, that is called German. I need to talk about, or I need the constant language to describe what I'm seeing, which is mixing some Greek phrases or Greek words with German in one single utterance.
But in that case, Greek is a dead language, so it is
I don't know, modern Greek.
Ah, okay.
Modern.
So, for example, Latin is well-defined object because it doesn't change anymore.
Exactly.
Because it's
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah. But still, it can pop up here and there in your Spanish. Didn't we talk about, or your English, didn't we talk about sine qua non conditions last class? Or some classes ago? So that is Latin too. So even if the language is dead, it can also be restored for these mixtures and appropriations that Androsopoulos describes. Okay, before we move on to Androsopoulos, any other question about is your answer? Was your question answered? Are you satisfied? Okay. So, Androsopoulos' paper applies many of the concepts that you already studied in other papers. For example, multilingualism. Networks here.
When we started networks, we established what we prefer as networks with connections and everything. But here we make the distinction and both.
Exactly. So, network.
Being network, so connected to other people, and being in the network, so
Okay, exactly. So, here you find two senses of the word, of the term network. And then multilingualism is pretty transparent. notice that at the beginning of the paper he talks about other concepts that are similar to multilingualism. He talks about polylingualism, centrolingualism, translanguaging. What he's doing is he's offering the reader the conceptual landscape, so to put it, revealing how phenomena like the one he describes has already been studied by other scholars. And they have given this phenomenon different names. And it's not simply a matter of names. There are also slight conceptual differences. We're not going to go into the details of each one, because what is important is the general picture. And the general picture is something you experience firsthand in your daily life. Do you mix languages when you post something in your social media platform? Do you mix languages when you send WhatsApp messages?
Yes.
I assume you don't use Facebook.
No.
Is my assumption correct?
Yes.
No,
That's a
lo
different
uso para ver Marketplace.
But what do you
Nunca compro nada, siempre vendo. Para venderlos a mi por el mes.
So, it depends on.
In order to talk about certain subjects, I use English. In order to talk about certain subjects, I use Spanish.
Okay, but what social network do you use?
Instagram.
Okay. Okay. What about the rest? Do you use Instagram?
Yes.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp.
Frequent users of Instagram?
Yes.
Yes.
¿Qué dijo?
Okay. Do you use TikTok?
No.
Are you the kind of user that consumes more than produces? Or
Yes.
are you prosumidores? Fashionable word that people in ciencias de la comunicación tend to use. Are you prosumidores? Consumidores? Prosumidores? And when you produce texts, posts, do you mix languages?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes. So you understand this paper, right? That's it. What you're doing is exploiting the resources that you have in your repertoire. What do you have in your repertoire? Well, something called Spanish, something called English. Some of you have something else like Korean, German, Dutch, Italian. And what else do you have in your repertoire? Memes, emojis, punctuation marks, digits, números. Okay? And what Yanis is describing is how teenagers, people a little younger than you are, but they could be you, they put all this together to communicate. And the beauty of this is that he describes some constraints. Does the concept constraint ring a bell from another unit? Okay, but these constraints are different. He talks about the constraints imposed by the fact that these texts are produced with a keyboard. In your case, you produce with a virtual keyboard. participate in these multilingual practices, what do you need? First of all, well, that's a material constraint. But you also need, okay,
Then you need to know
skills. Exactly. So you need literacy skills. How do you translate literacy skills? What's literacy? Alfabetización. You need to be able to read and write. Of course, you also need to be connected to the network. That's a constraint.
That's a constraint or a
Well, in this case, because it's a condition without which you couldn't be able to participate, that's and what is interesting is that these constraints, there is also the constraint of who is your audience, right? That's the third constraint he mentioned.
That'll be social network.
He doesn't call them your social network. And in fact, different researchers have given different names to that quote-unquote social network. Dr. Canas, in her paper about the YouTube video, remember the video that was about the Indian boy that pays homage to Maradona? She argued this is not a social network in the strict sense of a social network as defined by the variation in social linguistics that you study. She calls it an affiliation, no, an affinity network. So it's like a network, but not exactly like the other social network.
You don't interrupt because they use one person and combine, right?
Right. Yanis hasn't given a name yet. He just talks about an audience and the fact that there may be people that don't belong to your social network that could read your posts. So he talks about your post being overheard, right? Metaphorically overheard, but in that sense.
Sometimes the platforms restrict your audience, and sometimes you as a user can restrict your audience.
Exactly. But your audience being so diverse, because it can be made up of your friends, the ones you've chosen, but there can also be overhearers, metaphorically. And all of them may be multilingual, or they may speak one language or the other. So your audience also conditions, or these teenagers' audiences condition their production. And particularly their choice of language or their mixture of language. Okay?
In Instagram, there's this trend that people make secondary accounts in order to avoid overhearers. So they do a private account in which they choose which is their audience, and so they can speak more freely about certain subjects.
Okay.
So they have two accounts, one public account and one private account.
Oh no.
Okay.
Pero offline, sí. Griego, sí. Pero no la uso. Pues sí me la fa. Ay, ay. No, te miro. Pero un pedacito baiteado ya.
Page 198.
88, 88. Dijo 88 or 90? Okay, 98. Is 90 or 80? Para mí dijo 80.
Sorry, 88 or 98?
88. Probably I said 98, but I meant 88.
Okay,
Que no sucede vuelta.
In the first paragraph,
11:55.
the author names these three types of constraints. But what should be interesting for you to consider is not just how these are factors that limit and restrain somebody's multilingual production in online platform or in digital platform. It's also interesting to think about these factors as opportunities, because the keyboard, if you think about it, think about how it can limit somebody's multilingual production. For example, these Greek teenagers don't have easy access to Greek symbols to write in using the Greek script. However, the same object that limits their production offers opportunities for innovations and creative and playful uses of other symbols, not just to draw emojis, but also to, for example, use Latin or Roman script to write Greek words in a playful way, in a creative way. And just, if you think about the audience, for example, your audience is not just a constraint. And being multilingual, your audience can also offer an opportunity for innovative, humorous, playful uses of or mixtures of languages.
But isn't that kind of bastardizing the language?
Well, that's one of the questions.
Or at least
What
for
is
a
the language?
that is not like spoken in many countries or that has such a small community.
Yeah, that,
Wouldn't it put it in danger?
that is one of the questions that or one of the challenges by the author. Is there a thing called the language? Or what we have is in fact a set of resources coming from what we used to call languages. Okay? Is it a well-defined object, or is this a dynamic, ongoing process of using different sorts of resources to communicate? So if you see language as a well-defined object with its clear-cut boundaries, yes, you could argue, well, this is butchering and threatening the unity of the language. If you don't see it like that, if you see it with the translanguaging perspective, if you see it as a set of resources of all sorts, then you don't need to worry.
Because I think it would be one thing if they had access to options and then they end up using the second option, like instead of using the, I think it's the Latin option.
Yeah.
But then
that can bring about changes of all sorts. For example, changes in the orthography of the language. Maybe changes in the material stuff that is used to produce those texts. For example, designing new keyboards that new people could use. That wouldn't be it wouldn't bring about profits for the company manufacturing them because they know that they have few clients, etc. But what the author is saying is these teenagers communicate with what they have, even with copying and pasting texts that already exist, and they appropriate those texts. He even questions what are the limits of authorship, because copying and pasting a fragment that is already written in Greek on the web and just using it as your comment and paste it, that challenges the notions of intellectual property, authorship, plagiarism, etc.
And language change is then spread more rapidly due to this new access to innovative tokens, I would say.
Probably.
Because if you belong to a type social network, then you have access to language innovation.
Probably. Some language changes could be more rapidly spread through this, or thanks to these practices. Of course, phonological changes are not a case in point because what he's talking about here is literacy practices. Do you have any question about this paper? This is basically an application or a paper that applies most of the concepts you've already seen. For example, you get the concept of practice. And specifically, he's describing literacy practices, multilingual practices. So you see, there's always some adjective before practice. I strongly recommend you always use practice with a pre-modifier. Either to talk about discursive practices, social practices, or if you're being very, very specific, as in this case, multilingual practices. Do you have any questions about Yanis's chapter? I think I do. Talking about how mediation of written language by the keyboard is a constraint that can also be, or that can also bring about opportunities. Notice how he says that because there is no intonation, there are no prosodic features that can be exploited. These teenagers make use of graphic symbols of all sorts to express affection, to express attitude. So what seems to be a constraint, or well, it doesn't seem to be, what is a constraint can also be an opportunity for innovation. And that is something that people sometimes forget about. not just to talk about the affordances. Do you understand what affordances are? Really? I was not there. I was not here. Okay.
And also in strengths, what you mean by affordances.
Yeah, so
What forms of communication are made possible by digital technologies?
okay.
Yes, it's on page 20.
Okay, excellent.
Just like 2 lines below the
Okay.
constraint.
Right, so I will not repeat the already.
Which page? Sorry.
188. The other thing that would be interesting for you to explore is the use of the concept index again. So no questions about Yanis in this case. Janella. Cannabis.
On page 187, it talks about code switching and multilingualism, and it says that they coexist, but they are different things. I don't understand, like, why. I don't understand the relationship with code switching.
Do you understand what code switching is?
Yes, like using both the two languages, going from one to another.
Okay, yes. And what I understand from what he's saying is that multilingualism involves the co-occurrence of several languages, like in code switching, but in also other manifestations. So code switching is only a part of the picture of multilingualism. And on the screen, on the computer screen, there can be cases of coexistence of several languages that don't count as code switching. For example, when you have all the environment of your platform that is in English, for example, if you use Instagram, well, you see Instagram doesn't have this characteristic, because in Instagram all you see is the stories, well, not the stories. You see the names of the people that have published stories, and then as you scroll up, the feed. Okay? But on Facebook, on a computer screen, you get things like friends, photos, blah blah blah, and in English or in Spanish. You choose the language. But then simultaneously, you get advertisements that could be in a different language. So that coexistence of languages doesn't count as code switching. The code switching may be present in your post. Like, good morning, espero que andes todo bien. That's code switching. Okay? And multilingualism is manifest in the code switching and in all the other mixtures that occur on the screen.
So for code switching to occur, there doesn't need to be a change of frame, right? Not necessarily.
What?
A change of frame.
No. Sometimes code switching can be an indication of a change of frame, but not always. Okay. Any other questions, Sophia? You guys? Okay, then I have a question.
No, no puedo ir en pregunta. ¿Puedo terminar? ¿Qué hago yo? ¿Qué?
A very short training session for oral exam. This is like a mock oral exam with questions about units 4 or 5. So what I need is a volunteer. Somebody who's been revising, someone who wants to see how well they are preparing, someone who would like to get some immediate feedback on how well you're studying.
Are we going to have a work?
No, your first test will be. But next time we can have time for some reading practice.
Ella quiere participar, la rubia.
No volunteers?
Ask the question first.
These are questions about unit 4 mainly.
Son preguntas, chao. Porque no tienen certificado ahora.
3, 2, 1.
We can do a group answer.
No, not collective answer. Okay, guys, listen. In case you ever have an oral exam of any sort, not in linguistics too, in any other course or in any other situation, because jobs involve examinations of oral skills, particularly in your field. For example, if you have a job interview. What are the good things to do and the bad things to avoid? Number 1.
Project your voice.
Project your voice. Excellent. Keep eye contact. And the thing to avoid.
Stalling?
Saying, I'm so nervous. No, don't say that. Nobody cares about that. And we assume that if you care about what you're doing, probably your adrenaline is rushing, and that can make you a little anxious, a little nervous. But you don't have to say that. The reaction that you generate by saying, I'm nervous, is the exact opposite of what you hope to generate. People just, they don't like it, okay? So, you look confident. Even if you're shaking inside, you make sure you look confident. Yeah, that can trigger reactions that are worse.
It seems like you're not serious about what you're saying in that.
Do you take some time to think about the answer
Sí.
to the question? Absolutely. And you can ask for some time. Absolutely, that's legitimate. Okay? Don't fiddle with your fingers or with your hair, particularly with women. Don't start. I can't do that. Any other tip?
Listen to the question carefully. That's probably the most important part, because sometimes the question, well, most of the time, the questions are very short, like subject, predicate. And immediately after we ask the question, we listen, can you repeat that? And it seems like, you are not focusing. So of course, we don't expect you to remember the formulation of the question, but just pay attention to the keywords, right? Is this question a variation? Okay. Is this question about factors influencing, okay, just focus on keywords. So you don't need to remember, the formulation of the question, but of course, think about what what is the agenda, right, that the question proposes for you. We know that you're nervous because we see people blushing, we see people, drinking lots of water, we see people, I mean, most of us get nervous in an exam situation. It's okay, but just try to, one way to deal with that is to focus on, or to pay attention on what matters, the prompt, what you need to answer to. So probably that's.
And breathe. Breathe in and breathe out. Try to control what you can control. In an exam or in an interview, there are things you can't control, so don't worry about what you cannot control. What you can control is your breathing in and your breathing out. That sounds silly, but that can give you some confidence at a time like that. Okay? So let's practice very quickly. Can you answer this question? This is very simple.
Sophia.
Sophia. Come on, Sophia. Is variety another name for dialect? Sophia. The rest, you don't participate because you didn't want to. So, Sophia.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Do some people not speak a dialect? Sophia. So it's Sophia's turn. Sophia. Do some people not speak a dialect?
Because we're all very dependent on who we're talking to, the context.
Think about dialects. Your initial answer is correct. Your justification, that is what needs to be worked on. Okay, you think about that. Let's move on to the next question. Does the segmental environment, that is, the preceding or the following phoneme of a variable, lead to phonological variation?
Yes.
Can you give an example? Would you like some help? Okay.
For instance,
Bien, Sofía. Tú me levantas.
the ending S is followed by the sound.
The ending S is followed by
the it gets simulated, for instance, this year.
Okay, so it's followed by yeah. Like similar yeah. Okay, it gets assimilated by two. Sure. Okay. What other examples can you think about?
The final concentración se da when it's followed with a consonant or not, or a vowel.
Okay.
VR in non-native languages when they are preceding vowel sounds,
What happens to them?
they are retained.
Okay. Any other?
Non-relative variety.
Variety.
Okay? And then when you've learned in your pronunciation courses, for example, when in a syllables, in a stress syllable, a plosive like t is preceded by s, it's realized as non-as related. Lots of examples. Okay. Would you like to continue next week? Or maybe we have somebody else. Oh! Okay, listen guys. Next week is a revision lesson, so bring questions about Unit 4, Unit